They call you the Godfather of AI. So what would you be saying to people about their career prospects in a world of superintelligence?
Trained to be a plumber.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to become a plumber.
Geoffrey Hinton is the Nobel Prize winning pioneer whose groundbreaking work has shaped AI
and the future of humanity.
Why do they call you the Godfather of AI?
Because there weren't many people who believed that we could model AI on the brain so that it learned to do complicated things, like recognize objects and images or even do reasoning. And I pushed that approach for 50 years. And then Google acquired that technology. And I worked there for 10 years on something that's now used all the time in AI.
And then you left?
Yeah.
Why?
So that I could talk freely at a conference.
What did you want to talk about freely?
How dangerous AI could be. I realized that these things will one day get smarter than us, and we've never had to deal with that. And if you want to know what life's like when you're not the apex intelligence, ask a chicken. So there's risks that come from people misusing AI, and then there's risks from AI getting super smart and deciding it doesn't need us.
Is that a real risk?
Yes, it is, but they're not going to stop it because it's too good for too many things.
What about regulations?
They have some, but they're not designed to deal with most of the threats. Like the European regulations have a clause that say none of these apply to military uses of AI.
Really?
Yeah, it's crazy.
One of your students left OpenAI.
Yeah, he was probably the most important person behind the development of the early versions of ChatGPT. And I think he left because he had safety concerns. We should recognize that this stuff is an existential threat. And we have to face the possibility that unless we do something soon, we're near the end.
So let's do the risks and what we end up doing in such a world. This has always blown my mind a little bit. 53% of you that listen to this show regularly haven't yet subscribed to the show. So could I ask you for a favor before we start? If you like the show and you like what we do here and you want to support us, the free, simple way that you can do just that is by hitting the subscribe button. And my commitment to you is if you do that, then I'll do everything in my power, me and my team, to make sure that this show is better for you every single week. We'll listen to your feedback, we'll find the guests that you want me to speak to, and we'll continue to do what we do. Thank you so much. Geoffrey Hinton. They call you the Godfather of AI.
Yes, they do.
Why do they call you that?
There weren't that many people who believed that we could make neural networks work, artificial neural networks. So for a long time in AI, from the 1950s onwards, there were kind of two ideas about how to do AI. One idea was that the sort of core of human intelligence was reasoning. And to do reasoning, you needed to use some form of logic. And so AI had to be based around logic. And in your head, you must have something like symbolic expressions that you manipulated with rules. And that's how intelligence worked. And things like learning or reasoning by analogy, they'd all come later once we've figured out how basic reasoning works. There was a different approach, which is to say, let's model AI on the brain, because obviously the brain makes us intelligent. So simulate a network of brain cells on a computer and try and figure out how you would learn strengths of connections between brain cells so that it learned to do complicated things, like recognize objects and images or recognize speech or even do reasoning. I pushed that approach for like 50 years. Because so few people believed in it, there weren't many good universities that had groups that did that. So if you did that, the best young students who believed in that came and worked with you. So I was very fortunate in getting a whole lot of really good students.
Some of which have gone on to create and play an instrumental role in creating platforms like OpenAI.
Yes, so Ilya Sutskever would be a nice example, a whole bunch of them.
Why did you believe that modeling it off the brain was a more effective approach?
It wasn't just me believed it. Early on, von Neumann believed it and Turing believed it. And if either of those had lived, I think AI would have had a very different history. But they both died young.
You think AI would have been here sooner?
I think the neural net approach would have been accepted much sooner if either of them had lived.
In this season of your life, what mission are you on?
My main mission now is to warn people how dangerous AI could be.
Did you know that when you became the godfather of AI?
No, not really. I was quite slow to understand some of the risks. Some of the risks were always very obvious, like people would use AI to make autonomous lethal weapons. That is, things that go around deciding by themselves who to kill. Other risks, like the idea that they would one day get smarter than us and maybe would become irrelevant, I was slow to recognize that. Other people recognized it 20 years ago. I only recognized it a few years ago that that was a real risk that might be coming quite soon.
How could you not have foreseen that if with everything you know here about cracking the ability for these computers to learn similar to how humans learn and just, introducing any rate of improvement?
It's a very good question. How could you not have seen that? But remember, neural networks 20 or 30 years ago were very primitive in what they could do. They were nowhere near as good as humans at things like vision and language and speech recognition. The idea that you have to now worry about it getting smarter than people, that seems silly then.
When did that change?
It changed for the general population when ChatGPT came out. It changed for me when I realized that the kinds of digital intelligences we're making have something that makes them far superior to the kind of biological intelligence we have. If I want to share information with you, so I go off and I learn something, and I'd like to tell you what I learned. So I produce some sentences. This is a rather simplistic model, but roughly right. Your brain is trying to figure out, how can I change the strengths of connections between neurons so I might have put that word next? And so you'll do a lot of learning when a very surprising word comes, and not much learning when it's a very obvious word. If I say fish and chips, you don't do much learning when I say chips. But if I say fish and cucumber, you do a lot more learning. You wonder, why did I say cucumber? So that's roughly what's going on in your brain.
I'm predicting what's coming next.
That's how we think it's working. Nobody really knows for sure how the brain works, and nobody knows how it gets the information about whether you should increase the strength of a connection or decrease the strength of a connection. That's the crucial thing. But what we do know now from AI is that if you could get information about whether to increase or decrease the connection strength so as to do better at whatever tasks you're trying to do, then we could learn incredible things, because that's what we're doing now with artificial neural nets. It's just we don't know for real brains how they get that signal about whether to increase or decrease.
As we sit here today, what are the big concerns you have around safety of AI? If we were to list the top couple that are really front of mind and that we should be thinking about.
Can I have more than a couple?
Go ahead. I'll write them all down and we'll go through them.
Okay, first of all, I want to make a distinction between two completely different kinds of risk. There's risks that come from people misusing AI.
Yeah.
And that's most of the risks and all of the short-term risks. And then there's risks that come from AI getting super smart and deciding it doesn't need us.
Is that a real risk?
And I talk mainly about that second risk because lots of people say, is that a real risk? And yes, it is. Now, we don't know how much of a risk it is. We've never been in that situation before. We've never had to deal with things smarter than us. So really the thing about that existential threat is that we have no idea how to deal with it. We have no idea what it's going to look like. And anybody who tells you they know just what's going to happen and how to deal with it, they're talking nonsense. So we don't know how to estimate the probabilities it'll replace us. Some people say it's like less than 1%. My friend Yann Lecan, who was a postdoc with me, thinks, no. We're always going to be, we build these things, we're always going to be in control. We'll build them to be obedient. And other people, like Yudkowsky, say, no, these things are going to wipe us out for sure. If anybody builds it, it's going to wipe us all out. And he's confident of that. I think both of those positions are extreme. It's very hard to estimate the probabilities in between.
If you had to bet on who was right out of your two friends?
I simply don't know. So if I had to bet, I'd say the probabilities in between, and I don't know where to estimate it in between. I often say 10 to 20% chance they'll wipe us out, but that's just gut, based on the idea that we're still making them, and we're pretty ingenious, and the hope is that if enough smart people do enough research with enough resources, we'll figure out a way to build them so they'll never want to harm us.
Sometimes I think if we talk about that second path, sometimes I think about nuclear bombs and the invention of the atomic bomb and how it compares. Like, how is this different? Because the atomic bomb came along and I imagine a lot of people at that time thought our days are numbered.
Yes, I was there. We did.
Yeah. But we're still here.
We're still here, yes. So the atomic bomb was really only good for one thing, and it was very obvious how it worked. Even if you hadn't had the pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was obvious that it was a very big bomb that was very dangerous. With AI, it's good for many, many things, It's going to be magnificent in healthcare and education and more or less any industry that needs to use its data. It's going to be able to use it better with AI. So we're not going to stop the development. You know, people say, well, why don't we just stop it now? We're not going to stop it because it's too good for too many things. Also, we're not going to stop it because it's good for battle robots, and none of the countries that sell weapons are going to want to stop it. Like the European regulations, they have some regulations about AI, and it's good they have some regulations, but they're not designed to deal with most of the threats. And in particular, the European regulations have a clause in them that say none of these regulations apply to military uses of AI. So governments are willing to regulate companies and people, but they're not willing to regulate themselves.
It seems pretty crazy to me that I go back and forward, but if Europe has a regulation, but the rest of the world doesn't, aren't we just
It puts
putting
them at a
ourselves
competitive disadvantage.
Yeah.
So
And we're seeing this already. I don't think people realize that when OpenAI release a new model or a new piece of software in America, they can't release it to Europe yet because of regulations here. So Sam Altman tweeted saying, our new AI agent thing is available to everybody, but it can't come to Europe yet because there's regulations.
yes.
And what does that gives us a productivity disadvantage? Right.
What we need is, I mean, at this point in history, when we're about to produce things more intelligent than ourselves, what we really need is a kind of world government that works, run by intelligent, thoughtful people. And that's not what we got.
So, free-for-all.
Well, what we've got is we've got capitalism, which is done very nicely by us. It's produced lots of goods and services for us. But these big companies, they're legally required to try and maximize profits. And that's not what you want from the people developing this stuff.
So let's do the risks then. You talked about there's human risks and then there's...
So I've distinguished these two kinds of risk.
Yep.
Let's talk about all the risks from bad human actors using AI. There's cyber attacks. So between 2023 and 2024, they increased by about a factor of 1200%. And that's probably because these large language models make it much easier to do phishing attacks.
And a phishing attack, for anyone that doesn't know, is...
They send you something saying, hi, I'm your friend John and I'm stuck in El Salvador. Could you just wire this money? That's one kind of attack.
Yeah.
But the phishing attacks are really trying to get your logon credentials.
And now with AI, they can clone my voice, my image.
They can do all that.
I'm struggling at the moment because there's a bunch of AI scams on X and also Meta. And there's one in particular on Meta, so Instagram, Facebook at the moment, which is a paid advert where they've taken my voice from the podcast. They've taken my mannerisms and they've made a new video of me encouraging people to go and take part in this crypto Ponzi scam or whatever. And we spent weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on end emailing Meta, telling please take this down. They take it down, another one pops up. They take that one down, another one pops up. So it's like whack-a-mole.
Yes,
and then
very annoying.
the heartbreaking part is you get the messages from people that have fallen for the scam and they've lost £500 or $500.
And they're cross with you because you recommended it.
And I'm sad for them.
It's very annoying.
Yeah.
I have a smaller version of that, which is some people now publish papers with me as one of the authors. Mm-hmm. And it looks like it's in order that they can get lots of citations to themselves.
So cyber attacks, a very real threat. There's been an explosion of those.
And these already, obviously AI is very patient, so they can go through 100 million lines of code looking for known ways of attacking them. That's easy to do. But they're going to get more creative. And some people believe, and some people who know a lot believe that maybe by 2030, they'll be creating new kinds of cyber attacks, which no person ever thought of. So that's very worrisome.
Because they can think for themselves and discover
They can think
new
for
ways to
themselves.
attack.
They can draw new conclusions from much more data than a person ever saw.
Is there anything you're doing to protect yourself from cyber attacks at all?
Yes. It's one of the few places where I changed what I do radically because I'm scared of cyber attacks. Canadian banks are extremely safe. In 2008, no Canadian banks came anywhere near going bust. Mm-hmm. So they're very safe banks because they're well regulated, fairly well regulated. Nevertheless, I think a cyber attack might be able to bring down a bank. Now, if you have all my savings are in shares in banks, held by banks, So if the bank gets attacked and it holds your shares, they're still your shares. And so I think you'd be okay unless the attacker sells the shares, because the bank can sell the shares. If the attacker sells your shares, I think you're screwed. I don't know. I mean, maybe the bank would have to try and reimburse you, but the bank's bust by now, right? So I'm worried about a Canadian bank being taken down by a cyber attack and the attacker selling shares that it holds. So I spread my money, my children's money, between 3 banks, in the belief that if a cyber attack takes down one Canadian bank, the other Canadian banks will very quickly get very careful.
And do you have a phone that's not connected to the internet? Do you have any, like, I'm thinking about storing data and stuff like that. Do you think it's wise to consider having cold storage?
I have a little disk drive and I back up my laptop on this hard drive. So I actually have everything on my laptop on a hard drive. At least, if the whole internet went down, I had the sense I still got it on my laptop and I still got my information. Yeah. Then the next thing is using AIs to create nasty viruses.
Okay.
And the problem with that is that just requires one crazy guy with a grudge, one guy who knows a little bit of molecular biology, knows a lot about AI, and just wants to destroy the world. You can now create new viruses relatively cheaply using AI. And you don't have to be a very skilled molecular biologist to do it. And that's very scary. So you could have a small cult, for example. A small cult might be able to raise a few $1 million. For a few $1 million, they might be able to design a whole bunch of viruses.
Well, I'm thinking about some of our foreign adversaries doing government-funded programs. I mean, there was lots of talk around COVID and the Wuhan laboratory and what they were doing in gain-of-function research. But I'm wondering if in, a China or a Russia or an Iran or something, the government could fund a program for a small group of scientists to make a virus that they could,
I think they could, yes. Now, they'd be worried about retaliation. They'd be worried about other governments doing the same to them. Hopefully that would help keep it under control. They might also be worried about the virus spreading to their country.
Okay.
Then there's corrupting elections.
Okay.
So if you wanted to use AI to corrupt elections, a very effective thing is to be able to do targeted political advertisements where you know a lot about the person. So anybody who wanted to use AI for corrupting elections would try and get as much data as they could about everybody in the electorate. With that in mind, it's a bit worrying what Musk is doing at present in the States, going in and insisting on getting access to all these things that were very carefully siloed. The claim is it's to make things more efficient, but it's exactly what you would want if you intended to corrupt the next election.
How do you mean? Because you get all this data on the
You get all this data on people.
Yeah.
You know how much they make, where they live. You know everything about them. Once you know that, it's very easy to manipulate them.
Because you can make an AI that...
You can send messages that they'll find very convincing, telling them not to vote, for example. So I have no reason other than common sense to think this, but I wouldn't be surprised if part of the motivation of getting all this data from American government sources is to corrupt elections. Another part might be that it's very nice training data for a big model.
But he would have to be taking that data from the government and feeding it into his...
Yes. And what they've done is turned off lots of the security controls, got rid of some of the organization to protect against that.
So that's corrupting elections.
Okay. Then there's creating these 2 echo chambers by organizations like YouTube and Facebook, showing people things that will make them indignant. People love to be indignant.
Indignant as in angry? Or what does indignant mean?
Feeling I'm sort of angry, but feeling righteous.
Okay.
So, for example, if you were to show me something that said, Trump did this crazy thing, here's a video of Trump doing this completely crazy thing, I would immediately click on it.
Yeah. Okay, so putting us in echo chambers and dividing us.
Yes, and that's the policy that YouTube and Facebook and others use for deciding what to show you next is causing that. If they had a policy of showing you balance things, they wouldn't get so many clicks and they wouldn't be able to sell so many advertisements. And so it's basically the profit motive is saying, show them whatever will make them click. And what will make them click is things that are more and more extreme.
And that confirm my existing bias.
That confirm my existing bias. So you're getting your biases confirmed all the time.
Further and further and further and further, which means you're driving away.
Which is now,
from people.
in the States, there's two communities that don't hardly talk to each other.
I'm not sure people realize that this is actually happening every time they open an app. But if you go on a TikTok or a YouTube or one of these big social networks, the algorithm, as you said, is designed to show you more of the things that you had interest in last time. So if you just play that out over 10 years, it's going to drive you further and further and further into whatever ideology or belief you have, and further away from nuance and common sense and parity, which is a pretty remarkable thing. Like, people don't know it's happening. They just open their phones and experience something and think this is the news or the experience everyone else is having.
Right. So basically, if you have a newspaper and everybody gets the same newspaper, you get to see all sorts of things you weren't looking for. And you get a sense that if it's in the newspaper, it's an important thing or significant thing. But if you have your own news feed, my news feed on my iPhone, 3/4 of the stories are about AI. And I find it very hard to know if the whole world's talking about AI all the time or if it's just my news feed.
Okay, so driving me into my echo chambers, which is going to continue to divide us further and further. I'm actually noticing that the algorithms are becoming even more, tailored. And people might go, oh, that's great. But what it means is they're becoming even more personalized, which means that my reality is becoming even further from your reality.
Yeah, it's crazy. We don't have a shared reality anymore. I share reality with other people who watch the BBC and other BBC News and other people who read The Guardian and other people who read the New York Times. I have almost no shared reality with people who watch Fox News. It's worrisome.
Yeah.
Behind all this is the idea that these companies just want to make profit, and they'll do whatever it takes to make more profit.
Because they have to.
They're legally obliged to do that.
So we almost can't blame the company, can we?
Capitalism's done very well for us. It's produced lots of goodies.
Yeah.
But you need to have it very well regulated. So what you really want is to have rules so that when some company is trying to make as much profit as possible, in order to make that profit, they have to do things that are good for people in general, not things that are bad for people in general. So once you get to a situation where in order to make more profit, the company starts doing things that are very bad for society, like showing you things that are more and more extreme, that's what regulations are for. So you need regulations with capitalism. Now, companies will always say regulations get in the way, make us less efficient, and that's true. The whole point of regulations is to stop them doing things to make profit that hurt society. And we need strong regulation.
Who's going to decide whether it hurts society or not? Because,
that's the job of politicians. Unfortunately, if the politicians are owned by the companies, that's not so good.
And also the politicians might not understand the technology. You've probably seen the Senate hearings where they wheel out, Mark Zuckerberg and these big tech CEOs. And it is quite embarrassing because they're asking the wrong questions.
Well, I've seen the video of the US Education Secretary talking about how they're going to get AI in the classrooms, except she thought it was called A1. She's actually there saying we're going to have all the kids interacting with A1.
There's a school system that's going to start making sure that first graders or even pre-Ks have A1 teaching, every year starting, that far down in the grades. And that's just that's a wonderful thing.
And these are the people that...
These are the people in charge.
Ultimately, the tech companies are in charge because they will outsmart.
The tech companies in the States now, at least a few weeks ago when I was there, they were running an advertisement about how it was very important not to regulate AI because it would hurt us in the competition with China.
Yeah. And that's a plausible argument, no?
Yes, it will. But you have to decide, do you want to compete with China by doing things that will do a lot of harm to your society? And you probably don't.
I guess they would say that it's not just China, it's Denmark and Australia and Canada and the UK.
They're not so worried about.
And Germany. But if they kneecap themselves with regulation, if they slowed themselves down, then the founders, the entrepreneurs, the investors are going to go
I think calling it kneecapping is taking a particular point of view. It's taking the point of view that regulations are sort of very harmful. What you need to do is just constrain the big companies so that in order to make profit, they have to do things that are socially useful. Like Google search is a great example. That didn't need regulation because it just made information available to people. It was great. But then if you take YouTube, where it starts showing you adverts and showing you more and more extreme things, that needs regulation.
But we don't have the people to regulate it, as we've identified.
I think people know pretty well that particular problem of showing you more and more extreme things. That's a well-known problem that the politicians understand. They just need to get on and regulate it.
So that was the next point, which was that the algorithms are going to drive us further into our echo chambers.
Right.
What's next?
Lethal autonomous weapons.
Lethal autonomous weapons.
That means things that can kill you and make their own decision about whether to kill you.
Which is the great dream, I guess, of the military-industrial complex, of being able to create such weapons.
So the worst thing about them is big, powerful countries always have the ability to invade smaller, poorer countries. They're just more powerful. Mm-hmm. But if you do that using actual soldiers, you get bodies coming back in bags, and the relatives of the soldiers who were killed don't like it. So you get something like Vietnam. Mm-hmm. In the end, there's a lot of protest at home. If instead of bodies coming back in bags, it was dead robots, there'd be much less protest, and the military-industrial complex would like it much more, because robots are expensive. And suppose you had something that could get killed and was expensive to replace, that would be just great. Big countries can invade small countries much more easily because they don't have their soldiers being killed.
And the risk here is that these robots will malfunction, or they'll just be more...
No, that's even if the robots do exactly what the people who built the robots want them to do, the risk is that it's going to make big countries invade small countries more often.
More often, because they can.
Yeah, and it's not a nice thing to do.
So it brings down the friction of war.
It brings down the cost of doing an invasion.
Mm. And these machines will be smarter at warfare as well. So they'll be
well, even when the machines aren't smarter. So the lethal autonomous weapons, they can make them now. And I think all the big defense departments are busy making them. Even if they're not smarter than people, they're still very nasty, scary things.
Because I'm thinking that, they could show just a picture, go get this guy.
Yeah.
And go take out anyone he's been texting. And this little wasp.
So 2 days ago, I was visiting a friend of mine in Sussex who had a drone that cost less than £200. And the drone went up. It took a good look at me, and then it could follow me through the woods. Mm. And it was very spooky having this drone. It was about 2 meters behind me. It was looking at me. And if I moved over there, it could just track me for £200. But it was already quite spooky.
Yeah, and I imagine there's, as you say, a race going on as we speak to who can build the most complex autonomous weapons. There is a risk, I often hear, that some of these things will combine and the cyber attack will release weapons.
Sure. You can get combinatorially many risks by combining these other risks. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, for example, you could get a super intelligent AI that decides to get rid of people. And the obvious way to do that is just to make one of these nasty viruses. If you made a virus that was very contagious, very lethal, and very slow, everybody would have it before they realized what was happening. I mean, I think if a superintelligence wanted to get rid of us, it would probably go for something biological like that wouldn't affect it.
Do you not think it could just very quickly turn us against each other? For example, it could send a warning on the nuclear systems in America that there's a nuclear bomb coming from Russia, or vice versa, and one retaliates.
Yeah, I mean, my basic view is there's so many ways in which a superintelligence could get rid of us, it's not worth speculating about them.
What is to stop
what
it?
You have to do is prevent it ever wanting to. That's what we should be doing research on. There's no way we're going to prevent it from... It's smarter than us, right? There's no way we're going to prevent it getting rid of us if it wants to. We're not used to thinking about things smarter than us. If you want to know what life's like when you're not the apex intelligence, ask a chicken.